A relationship turning into a love triangle. What the hell? I mean, there are a million reasons that can happen, right? One of the most common is probably just, a slow, quiet loss of connection. That spark just kind of fades away. And when those feelings start to go, people sometimes start looking for that missing piece somewhere else. And a lot of the time, honestly, one of the people in the relationship just has no idea what's really going on. Usually these things happen during like a personal crisis, or I guess as a way to get back at someone. But whatever the reason is, that kind of dynamic just creates this incredibly intense emotional strain, and you're always running the risk of losing both relationships at the same time. This story about Meredith Sullivan, it really sent shockwaves across the country, and it became one of the most talked about cases from 2018. Meredith Sullivan, who later went by her married name Chapman, was born on January 17th, 1985 in Newark, Delaware. She was the youngest of three kids to her parents, Andrew and Faye Sullivan. Meredith had an older brother, Thomas, and a sister, Jessica, who just adored her, and always loved spending time with her. The Sullivan family was pretty comfortable financially, and Meredith's parents made sure their kids got a really top-notch education, and they always encouraged them to explore their talents. But even with all that stability, Meredith's life, it took a turn when she was still in middle school. Her parents decided to get a divorce. The separation, to be fair, was pretty amicable. There weren't any huge legal battles or conflicts, and both Andrew and Faye stayed really active in their kids' lives. For Meredith, I guess the divorce was an emotional blow, but she never really felt neglected or unloved. She was kind-hearted and outgoing, and she made friends really easily. Her cheerful personality and, her engaging nature made her pretty popular with her peers. Even from an early age, Meredith was a top student. School just seemed to come naturally to her. She was so curious and learned things so fast. She was always eager to take the lead on stuff. She was also pretty artistic and developed a real interest in painting. On top of her schoolwork and art, she was also really active in sports like rhythmic gymnastics and ballroom dancing. Later on in high school, she focused on cheerleading and actually ended up as the team captain. Even as a teen, Meredith was driven. She was focused, she was confident, and determined. She was always just working hard to reach her goals. And yet, she was always fair and respectful to other people, never resorting to being dishonest, which, really earned her a lot of admiration from her classmates and her teachers. After graduating from high school, Meredith went to the University of Delaware. She decided to study corporate communications and social sciences. She adapted to college life super quickly, stood out academically, and even earned a scholarship based on her grades. She stayed involved with cheerleading and even gave presentations on it. She also played tennis, danced, and was in some university theater productions. During her junior year, Meredith got an internship at a radio station in Philadelphia. She worked in what was a pretty new field at the time, managing the station's presence on social media. That experience ended up being a perfect match for her. It really solidified her interest in communications. Meredith eventually became a member of this elite student organization, and she took on a big leadership role there. She was already building connections and, laying the groundwork for her future professional network. For her senior project, she decided to focus on the journey of Joe Biden, and she made a documentary film that got some pretty serious recognition. The project even got a nomination for a regional Emmy Award, and it opened a lot of doors for her in the media and communications industry. In 2007, Meredith graduated with a bachelor's degree and started working as a public relations assistant for a Congressman, Michael Castle. Straight up, she was determined to build a career in politics, so she pretty quickly got involved in the election campaign for a former finance executive, Chip Flowers. Meredith's ambition and work ethic really propelled her forward. She thrived in those really fast-paced environments and was always looking for ways to grow intellectually. While she was still in college, Meredith had met a young man named Luke Chapman. He was a little older than her and was also a graduate of the University of Delaware. The two of them connected pretty fast and started a relationship. Meredith and Luke had a ton in common. They were both intelligent, ambitious, and really motivated. Just like Meredith, Luke was pursuing a career in public service and became a member of the Newark City Council. For a while, their professional paths were perfectly aligned, and they both made some pretty impressive moves in their respective fields. The couple had a solid income, and not long after they got married, they bought a big house in a quiet, upscale neighborhood called Fairfield Crest. They decided to wait on having a family and instead focused on building their political careers. They brought home a golden retriever, named him Indy, and cared for him with the kind of devotion you'd normally see a parent have for their child. After a few years, Meredith made a pretty big career change. She left politics behind and went into education, actually. She got her master's in education and went back to her old school, the University of Delaware, where she started teaching classes on public relations and digital marketing. She worked on new ways to use social media and did a lot of research on, how communication was changing. She also served on a bunch of university committees. In 2013, Meredith became the director of marketing while she kept on lecturing and publishing her academic work. Her colleagues and her students, they all spoke so highly of her, praising her intelligence, her professionalism, and her just relentless drive. Luke's career was moving along too. He was putting in really long hours and taking his responsibilities seriously. But as time went on, both he and Meredith got more and more wrapped up in their own stuff. They were rarely even home at the same time, and pretty soon, a distance just started to grow between them. Even though things looked perfect on the outside, their relationship had just lost its spark. They weren't talking about starting a family anymore, and their marriage became more of a formality, not a partnership. Still, neither of them was in a hurry to end it. Their arrangement kind of seemed to work for them. They were living under the same roof, but it was more like roommates than a married couple. They each handled their own finances and their own routines. There were no arguments, no confrontations. At public events, they would show up together and look totally content. Nobody in their circle had any idea what was really going on behind closed doors. Then, in 2016, Meredith decided to get back into politics, but this time, not as a staffer. She was going to run as a candidate herself. Ambitious and determined, she launched a campaign to challenge the sitting senator for Delaware's 8th District, Dave Sokola. Her campaign actually got some real traction, and she had a pretty strong shot at winning, too. In the end, though, she lost by a super small margin, less than 5%. After the race, Meredith just went back to her work in education and kept building her academic career. By 2017, she decided she needed an assistant, a creative director, to manage the marketing stuff under her. So she posted the job online, and pretty soon she had a whole bunch of applications. Meredith interviewed every single person, but one of them really stood out, a 49-year-old man named Mark Gerardo. He met every single requirement: the experience, the credentials, the skills for the job, all of it. And in the interview, he made such a strong impression that he was hired to start right away. Mark was living in North Carolina at the time, but he was willing to move for the job. He had been married for almost 25 years to a woman named Jenna Gerardo. For the time being, she stayed back to deal with selling their house and wrapping up a bunch of other stuff before she joined him in their new place. Mark turned out to be a really thoughtful, smart, and well-educated guy with a great background in marketing. He went way beyond what they expected from the very beginning. He and his new boss quickly built this great working relationship, finding common ground almost immediately. Mark was 16 years older than his young boss. And at the time, believe it or not, both of them were still legally married, but neither of them really let that get in the way. Meredith had become emotionally distant from the husband she'd been with for almost 10 years because they were both just consumed with their careers. Mark's situation was even more complicated. He had been married to his wife for almost 25 years and had stayed committed that whole time. As co-workers, they just got close without even really realizing it. Their collaboration was so smooth, and they just had this unspoken understanding. Mark was so reliable, so efficient, and so skilled. But behind that professional synergy, something a lot deeper was starting to form, and nobody around them seemed to notice. To Meredith, Mark became more than just a trusted colleague. She felt like she could confide in him, not just about work, but about her personal thoughts and her emotions. And That meant a lot to her, because in her constant rush for success, she just didn't have much time left for friends or family or even having a real meaningful conversation. Her husband, I mean, he had pretty much become a stranger, not a partner. But with Mark, she just felt calm and safe and understood. Eventually, she stopped fighting it and invited him to spend time together outside of work. Just 2 weeks after Mark moved to Newark, Meredith suggested they meet up after hours and just, relax at a local bar. She wanted to talk away from the office in a more casual setting. During that evening, Mark just opened up to her, and for the first time, he told her his whole story. Mark Gerardo was born in 1968, and he was the oldest child of Leonardo and Esther Gerardo. His parents were really strict and super religious, raising their big family with these really firm expectations about being obedient and disciplined. Right from a young age, Mark learned the value of hard work, and he was also a really good student. When he was 18, Mark first met his future wife, Jenna Cox. She was 16 at the time and working as a waitress at this fast food restaurant. Mark started stopping by all the time, just, I guess, drawn to the girl behind the counter, but he never found the courage to actually talk to her or say how he felt. Eventually, Jenna and her family moved to a nearby town, and the two of them lost touch for a few years. Then, in 1990, they ran into each other again, this time at a local shopping center where Jenna was working as a sales associate. Mark was so thrilled to see her, but he was still too shy to do anything about it. So, sensing that, Jenna actually made the first move and asked him out herself. Their relationship moved pretty fast after that. They started dating seriously, and in 1992, Mark proposed. Jenna said yes right away, and less than a year later, they were married. The newlyweds settled down in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they bought a house together. By that time, Mark had a degree in graphic design and had a good, well-paying job in his field. Jenna was working as a real estate agent, and they lived a pretty comfortable life. Even though they never had kids of their own, during their years of marriage, they adopted 3 dogs and just treated them like family. To their friends, neighbors, and relatives, Mark and Jenna seemed like a perfect couple. They appeared to be so in love and genuinely happy. They never had public arguments, and their home was known for being super peaceful and harmonious. Both of them were strong, independent people with steady incomes and stable lives. But by the mid-2000s, after more than 2 decades together, the Gerardeas hit a rough patch. During that time, Mark lost both of his parents in a short period of time, and Jenna, who had put a lot of money into starting her own business, faced a major financial setback. With all that emotional and financial pressure building up, they decided they needed a big life change. They sold their house and moved to this quiet town called Greenville, South Carolina. Mark pretty quickly found a solid marketing job there, and Jenna decided to just, take a step back and focus on the home until she found the right opportunity. During that time, they traveled a lot and just spent more time together. The emotional distance that had crept in seemed to just fade away. Their relationship regained that spark, and for a year and a half, they were basically on a second honeymoon. Then, in 2017, Mark started looking for new jobs, hoping to find something that was more fulfilling and paid better. That's when he saw a job posting from Meredith. He applied, and the position required him to move to a different state. They weren't worried about the move at all. Mark left first, since the job started right away, while Jenna stayed behind to handle selling the house and finalizing everything else. She was planning to join him about a month later. That evening, as Mark was sharing his story with Meredith, she listened so intently. And then she started to open up about her own life, her career achievements, and the quiet way her marriage was falling apart. As they talked, they found themselves connecting on a deeper level. There was this growing sense of familiarity, as if they'd known each other for years. They felt like they could trust each other completely. They stayed at the bar super late that night, and afterward, they went back to Mark's apartment where they ended up spending the night together. From that moment on, a secret relationship started to develop, one that they kept hidden from everyone around them. They kept seeing each other in secret, often meeting at Mark's rental while his wife was still out of state. For Meredith, there didn't seem to be any real roadblock to starting a romance with Mark. Her marriage to Luke had been a formality for a long time. They'd both already moved on emotionally. But for Mark, man, things were way more complicated. First of all, he had never been unfaithful in his entire 25-year marriage. Second, he was just unexpectedly falling for Meredith, who was way younger than him. And third, he knew full well that she was still legally married, just like he was. But despite everything, the relationship between Meredith and Mark continued even after Jenna moved to Newark. And right from the start, Jenna sensed that something just wasn't right. She felt like another woman had already been inside their new home, but she decided not to confront her husband right away. Instead, she wanted to get some information and confirm her suspicions. Mark was staying late at work all the time and was getting more and more distant at home. When she asked him about it, he just blamed it on being exhausted and having a heavy workload. The physical closeness between them had basically vanished. This went on for months until Jenna finally just asked him straight up if he was seeing someone else. Mark denied everything. He actually tried to end the affair with Meredith at one point, but the connection between them, I guess, proved to be too strong. So after a brief pause, they went right back to meeting in secret. Meredith, meanwhile, had made up her mind. She had a conversation with her husband, Luke, and they both agreed to go ahead with a peaceful divorce. On February 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day, of all days, Jenna confronted Mark. She told him that she knew all about his relationship with his boss. It turned out she had hired a private investigator who had followed Mark, taken incriminating pictures, and documented all the places where he and Meredith met. With all that evidence piling up, Mark had nowhere to hide. He still tried to explain himself, promising Jenna he would end the relationship and try to save their marriage. But that promise didn't last long. He kept seeing Meredith, just with a little more caution now. Jenna didn't believe him. She kept tracking his movements, putting a GPS device in his car, and installing monitoring software on his phone and computer. And the tensions just kept rising. When Mark found the tracking device in his car, he realized he couldn't put off making a decision any longer. He told Jenna that, honestly, he had fallen in love with Meredith and wanted to be with her, and he was planning to file for divorce. For Jenna, who was 47 at the time, this was just a devastating blow. I mean, they had spent almost 25 years together, and now her husband was leaving her for a younger woman, his boss. On top of that, she hadn't even found work yet in this unfamiliar city they had just moved to. So she was left with no financial stability, no emotional support, no sense of direction. Her whole world was just unraveling, and she was really at her breaking point emotionally. By early March of 2018, Meredith had finalized her divorce from Luke. She wasn't tied down anymore, and she fully expected Mark to follow through too. But things were just more complicated on his end. Because of some specific legal stuff in their new state, Mark had to meet a residency requirement before he could actually file for divorce. They had only just moved there. So while he was waiting out that required period, Mark moved out of the house he shared with Jenna and into Meredith's apartment. Around that same time, Meredith actually resigned from her position at the University of Delaware. She was set to become the vice president and chief marketing officer at Villanova University, which is one of Pennsylvania's most prestigious institutions. Plus, she'd been offered a leadership role at Ruffalo Noel Levitz, a huge consulting firm focused on higher education strategy. On April 5th, Meredith Sullivan moved into her new home, located in Radnor Township, Pennsylvania. She was slowly getting settled, and about a week later, Mark joined her. He had also left his old job and transitioned to Villanova University, where he started working as Meredith's personal assistant. It really seemed like a fresh start for them, a new chapter full of promise. All that was left were just a few final steps to officially move forward. But neither of them had any idea that a deadly threat was already looming. Jenna, feeling incredibly hurt and betrayed, had actually started putting together this really disturbing plan for revenge. On April 23rd, 2018, Mark and Meredith had made plans to meet at a local restaurant to celebrate their new beginning. Meredith stopped by her house first to change, while Mark placed their order and just waited for her to arrive. Time went by, but Meredith didn't show up. She wasn't answering her phone either, and Mark started to feel uneasy. Then, out of nowhere, he began getting these really unsettling messages from Jenna. Her words were just full of anger and bitterness. She wished him a life of misery, and then came a photo that just stopped him cold. It was a picture of Meredith's kitchen. Terrified, Mark dropped everything and just rushed to Meredith's house. When he got there, her car was parked in the driveway. Just down the street, a black Chevrolet was parked, but Mark didn't really think much of it at the time. The lights were on inside the house, and the front door was unlocked. But once he stepped inside, everything just went silent. He walked straight to the kitchen and just froze in horror. Lying there on the floor in these huge pools of blood were the lifeless bodies of Meredith and Jenna. It was too late to help them. Both had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. Mark screamed and ran outside. The noise got the attention of nearby neighbors, who immediately called emergency services. At first, investigators even considered the possibility that Mark himself might have been responsible, caught up in all that emotional turmoil and a complicated relationship. But that theory was pretty quickly ruled out. The weapon was found right there beneath Jenna's body, and it only had her fingerprints on it. Authorities determined it was a planned act, followed by voluntary self-harm. Shortly before the incident, Jenna had sent several emails to a close friend. The content just strongly indicated that she was planning to do something extreme. Evidence later showed that she had spent about 2 weeks getting ready. She bought a gun, rented a car, and got stuff together for a disguise. Jenna had somehow managed to find Meredith's new address all on her own. She spent a full week just watching the couple's movements. Neighbors later reported seeing a weird woman in a wig driving a black Chevrolet, just sort of lurking around the neighborhood. But, she didn't really seem like a threat. Even Mark remembered noticing the car, but he just figured it belonged to somebody who lived there. Jenna had studied their schedules and knew exactly when they usually came home. On that day, she arrived early, parked a few blocks away, and walked to the house. She broke in by smashing a window in the backyard and snuck inside. It's believed she planned to confront and kill both Mark and Meredith, and then end her own life. But her plan didn't go exactly as she expected. Meredith arrived at the house alone. Later, investigators found out that Meredith had taken out a life insurance policy about a year and a half earlier for a value of $500,000. The beneficiary listed was her ex-husband, Luke. When the divorce was finalized, the beneficiary information hadn't been updated. Because of that, Luke Chapman became a person of interest in the investigation as authorities looked into whether he might have had some indirect involvement in what happened. But, that theory was eventually dismissed because there was no evidence. With no one to blame, the investigation only lasted a couple of days. Authorities soon closed the case, deciding that the person responsible was no longer alive and that no other suspects were involved. Mark was cleared of any wrongdoing, but he found himself under this incredibly intense public and media scrutiny. Instead of just disappearing from the public eye, he decided to speak openly. He gave interviews, appeared on talk shows, and discussed the events in pretty great detail. A year later, Gerardo published a memoir telling the story of his relationships with both women and the events that led to that tragic outcome. He talked about how the whole experience had affected him emotionally, saying that he never in a million years imagined that the woman he had spent almost 25 years with could be capable of something so devastating. While the book became a bestseller and was well received by a lot of readers, public opinion was kind of divided. Some people accused him of taking advantage of both women and later just profiting from their deaths by turning the tragedy into his personal story. As for Luke, Meredith's family filed a lawsuit against him after he refused to give back the life insurance money he got after her death. The court ended up ruling in his favor, requiring him to return only 10% of the total amount to her relatives. The judge determined that there was no malicious intent on his part. Since Meredith obviously hadn't anticipated the end of her life, she just hadn't made any changes to the policy. After her death, Meredith Sullivan's remains were cremated, and her parents were given the urn. Jenna Gerardo was laid to rest in her hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And to this day, a lot of people still believe that Mark was also supposed to be a target that night and that he just barely escaped a fatal ending.